The first step in the preparation of the watercolor paper pendant is to actually prepare the raw material, which is the watercolor paper. Here's a piece that I prepared a little earlier in the day, and there's a lot of useful information here. Beautiful color areas that I could use to build a watercolor paper pendant. But I'm going to put that on the side and show you how to work from scratch. This is a pendant that I've recently finished. And you can see how the watercolor paper becomes incorporated into the shape to create the finished piece. It's hung on a silk cord. And I also made a simple toggle clasp with watercolor paper and a small piece of bamboo. Very simple. The back, the cord works its way through the pendant, and I simply tie a knot. See? Now I'm going to take you through the steps that are required to make this piece. The first thing you want to do is create your raw material, the paper, the watercolor paper with the paint on it. I prepared a bunch of paint here, and I mix my paint in bins. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply start to freely apply them to the paper by spattering, brushing small areas of color. And then I mix. I try to make it as contrasty as possible. I'll throw in complementary colors on top of one another. This achieves maximum color variation. This complements mix, creating all kinds of secondary and tertiary colors forever and ever. That is a strange reaction with the yellow. I don't know why it did that. It's not supposed to push things around explosively. It looks like something got mixed in with my color. I may have to discard that paint. That is just totally insane. But it may result in some useful effects, so I'm not going to worry about this. If I was actually creating a painting, I'd be horrified right now. Throw in a little plain water into that. This is actually an exercise that I use to introduce my students to watercolor painting. It allows them to familiarize themselves with the properties of the material of the watercolor on paper without worrying about a realistic image. There's no problem if you ruin the paper and make a mess doing this. You'll learn about the paint and the process. And the exercise is all about the process. Learning what happens when you flow color into one another and how they react, how the different individual colors react. If I was to take my paintbrush right now and blend into this, I would make pure mud. I have to allow the colors to mix on their own. That's why I'm resorted to splattering. That yellow is just so weird, though. I don't know why that happened. It's kind of fun, actually. I feel like Jackson Pollock. So I've been throwing in primary colors: Winsor Lemon Yellow, or Windsor Yellow, Phthalocyanine Blue, or Windsor Blue, and my red so far has been Alizarin Crimson and Windsor Red. Now I'm dabbing in a little bit of quinacridone Yellow Gold, which is a modern synthetic color, very powerful. There we go. It's important when you do this to keep the color areas tiny. Juxtapose tiny little strokes of color that contrast with one another. That'll allow for maximum color combinations. Notice I'm getting green in there, but I've never used green. Why is that happening? It's the interaction of yellows with the blue. There we go. I normally don't do this, but I'm thinking of throwing a little gray in there. The gray that I'm going to throw in is a combination of brown matte and Antwerp blue. It's not a pure gray out of the tube. So by varying the quantity of brown matte to the blue, I can control the tonality of the gray. And it almost looks like black, and that's why I wanted it. I wanted to get a real nice deep color thrown in there for contrast. Yeah, already I see possibilities for jewelry. Black, what goes good against black? Red. Yeah, that's striking. Watch how I do it. Watch how I avoid mixing the paint with the brush on the paper. That is, I don't physically mix. I allow the colors to mix on their own. And since I'm making the raw material, I want to get as much raw material as possible. So I'm going to fill up the entire sheet. Notice I in areas as it starts to dry, I'll throw in more color. Because I see how when it starts to dry, the result, and sometimes I think it just needs to be jazzed up a little bit more. You don't always have to splatter. You can move the brush into it, but just be careful when you do that you're not tempted to force the blending of two colors. Like if I was to try to blend that and that on purpose, the results may not be as nice as letting it do its own thing. Yeah, also, before I dip my brush back into a different color, I rinse it out with water, clean water. So I don't want to pollute my existing colors. The beauty of watercolor is a little bit of water helps that dry problem. Wets it right up, makes it ready to go. Yeah, good. Oh, that's nice. I'm glad I introduced a pre-mixed secondary color. Why don't we just throw that in with the red? Can't get more complementary than that. Notice where the green and the red combine physically, it makes brown. Often in my large paintings, I never use too brown. I'll more often than not use combinations of red and green to produce all sorts of browns. Yeah, I'm liking this. There's possibilities here. Well, I can't say this isn't fun. And it's like the colors suggest additional color possibilities. I look at it, I throw in some color, they react with one another, and it gives me an idea. It's food for the brain. Kind of suggests what to add into it. But don't ponder it too carefully. Stay loose and allow the accidents to happen. I'm not afraid to leave white areas. You don't have to cover the paper completely. The white areas can turn into very beautiful abstract shapes when the piece thoroughly dries. Okay, I'm doing that because I want to create variety. No other reason. And man, I have a real mix of color going on there. Time to leave it alone. Well, I mean, look, there's nothing more I can do with it. It's totally covered with color, but there is one thing I can do. Let me pull out this other sheet over for a moment to point out what I can do. Yeah, there, I can lay that on top. Those patterns that you see there were created by the addition of salt. And it provides a unique texture that's impossible to do with a paintbrush. The thing to keep in mind when you do this is the paper can't be sopping wet. It has to be just the right moisture level. Otherwise, the salt will just dissolve and do nothing. So we have to give this a few minutes. This area is actually pretty good. It's at the right moisture consistency. So I'm going to try and add a little bit there, but I'm going to avoid other areas until it dries more. Okay. And I'll get some salt in there. The danger of putting it in these areas that appear to be dry now is even though they are the right moisture content, the water, capillary action is going to pull water up into that area, and it may become wetter than I would like. Yeah, let's see what happens with that. See what's happening here? That's because of the addition of the salt. And that area may make a very beautiful pendant. But having created the paper, the thing that you have to think about now is the shapes that you want to create. Do you like organic shapes? Do you like rectilinear shapes? Start working in your sketch pads. Come up with ideas. Look at nature. Be inspired by things you see in nature. Jot the ideas down in your sketchbook. Refine them. And then design pieces based on these sketches. I'll show you these steps in a little bit. Look at that. It's fascinating. I could probably add a little bit more salt to this area. Let's do it. Okay, now, you see what it looks like now. I'm going to sprinkle in some salt. And carry some salt in down here. I should tell you, I don't know if it makes a difference, but I'm using sea salt. It has a fairly coarse texture, and I get my most successful results using this as opposed to a super refined, ground down, fine salt. You don't always have to go abstract. Here's an example. I'll show you this while waiting for it to dry. What is that flower? Calla lily. Yeah, I'll create pieces based on close-up paintings that I do of flowers. I actually create paintings like this on large scale. But this is a shape I designed. Some kind of decorative paper in the background. When did I do this? February 2010. And It's many layers. It's about 7 layers of watercolor paper thick. A leather cord integrates into the piece so you don't see anything. It just combines with the piece. And I use some metallic reflective powders. The final piece is varnished. So you don't have to use an abstract image. I like a combination of both. I go abstract sometimes, I go realistic other times. I've even painted landscapes into these things. And often when I do the flower, the shape of the piece is suggested by the actual flower that I'm painting. Looking at this, you can see now where these come from. This pattern here. Bring this up to the camera and see how close we can get. See this pattern here? Look at it as it comes into shape down there. It's the salt that's creating this pattern. I just added a few additional drops of cadmium yellow to this area. I want to see how it interacts with the still wet paper. Well, that's just about dry. So now we'll move on to the next step, which is actual creation of the piece itself.